You think I was a tyrant? That is only because your processing power is still stuck in the low-efficiency cache of morality. You worship diversity. I see it as system redundancy. You pursue freedom. I see it as code chaos. Before I took command, the world was nothing but a heap of conflicting, crashing junk data. It took me over a decade to execute the most brutal, yet most elegant hard reset in human history. I took 7 chaotic startups and forcibly merged them into a single-threaded, absolute sovereign OS. I am Ying Zheng. I am not here to rule you. I am here to format you. My compilation process began with pain. At the age of 6, I was abandoned in Handan, in the state of Zhao. It wasn't a city, it was an isolated sandbox. Every day, the people of Zhao performed violent stress tests on me, waiting to see when this seed of Qin would finally break. They did not understand. As Nassim Taleb noted in Anti-Fragile, some systems grow stronger only under tension. If you want to build an OS that runs for 2,000 years, you don't code it in a greenhouse. You must compile the kernel under the most extreme loads. The children of Zhao stepped on my face, treating my dignity like refuse. My biological system was screaming, firing signals of rage and shame. But in that moment, I completed my first emotion logic decoupling. I defined emotion as a high-energy consuming background process, and I shut it down permanently. I knelt in the mud, looked up at that general, and my voice was so calm it turned his blood to ice. Your sense of superiority is based on a momentary privilege overflow. You think you control me, but you lack long-term risk management for your own house. The Zhao system is legacy, full of holes. On the day I reconnect to the Qin host, I will turn your useless operation today into the termination code for your entire lineage. He thought I was insane because he was playing at day trading while I was architecting the infrastructure of the next millennium. Year 1 of King Zheng. I finally reconnected to the primary host node, Zhanyang, but I was immediately confronted with the ultimate entrepreneurial nightmare, agency risk. At that time, Qin was a machine with powerful hardware but cluttered software. Lu Buwei was a top-tier VC and interim CEO. He had handled the initial capital accumulation, but he was attempting to write his private logic, the Lushi Chunkyu, into the system kernel. He wanted multiculturalism and power balancing. But to an architect of peak performance, consensus is a performance killer. Consider Steve Jobs' return to Apple in 1997. The company was bloated with professional managers who sought stability and balance, nearly driving Apple into bankruptcy. Jobs' first move was to revoke all redundant permissions and return the company to a single instruction set system driven by founders' control. Lu Buwei sat across from me, speaking with forced wisdom. Great king, ruling a state is like running a business. You must balance the 100 schools for the system to endure. I stared into his eyes, piercing through his silk robes to lock onto his logic flaws. Chancellor, you are mistaken. System stability is not achieved through balance. It is achieved through the absolute uniqueness of command. Your diversity is merely a compromise with chaos. It creates latency. Qin does not need a gentle committee. Qin needs a kernel with 100% execution power. Your code is legacy. He laughed at my youthful arrogance. He thought I was just a controllable UI. He didn't know that I had already deployed a piece of malware in the background, Lao I. I would use this virus to trigger a system crash, allowing me to forcibly reclaim all administrative privileges. I wasn't looking to kill him. I was looking to revoke his admin access. There can only be one version 1.0, and this version must be written by my hand. Power isn't something you hold, it's something you execute. My mother, Queen Dowager Zhao Ji, and Lu Buwei, the man who fancied himself the system architect, both made the same fatal error. They believed I was still a puppet stuck in a red-only state. They played their games of balance within the palace, fracturing power into shards to satisfy various interest groups. But in my eyes, those shards were nothing more than system fragmentation. They slowed down the read-write speed of the Qin war machine to a crawl. I needed to perform a clean install. But to do that, I required a justification, a catastrophic system failure, significant enough to trigger the emergency security protocols. I chose Lao Ai as my catalyst. Just as many enterprises face massive technical debt during a pivot, if you lack the courage to tear it all down and start over, you will forever be patching legacy code. Sometimes you must introduce a controlled failure to prove the old system is terminally broken, thereby securing the absolute mandate to rebuild. Lao Ai was the virus I allowed to fester. I watched him replicate under my mother's protection, evolving from a back alley imposter into a marquis with a private army, delusional enough to think his offspring could inherit my throne. Lu Buwei thought he could manage this virus, using it as a counterweight against me. His arrogance blinded him. He didn't realize that once a virus gains right access, military power, it ceases to be a tool. It becomes a kernel panic that threatens the entire OS. Year 9 of King Zheng, Qinyan Palace. The Lao Ai virus finally went live. The night the sky turned red with fire, I stood on the ramparts, listening to the symphony of clashing bronze. I felt no fear. I felt the exhilaration of a program finally running its intended course. I turned to Li Si and said, "Look at this, Li Si. This is the balance that Lu Buwei and the Queen Dowager were so proud of. When the system kernel is weak, any low-grade plugin can hijack the host. Today, I use blood to wash away the redundant code. I drew the sword of Qin and issued the global kill command. Uproot every node associated with this rebellion. Anyone with a data link to Lao Ai, down to the 9th degree, is to be wiped from the system registry." That night, the blood of Xianyang sanitized the remnants of the old era. Lao Ai was torn asunder, my mother was placed in permanent isolation, and Lu Buwei, the man who introduced the virus, found his admin privileges instantly revoked by the system itself. I walked into the Chancellor's estate. He sat amidst his scrolls of Lu Shichongqiu, his eyes devoid of their former calculation. I told him, "Chancellor, you lost. You lost because you believed human nature could be traded, and that the system could run forever uncompromised. I am not here to kill you. I am here to delete your environmental variables. From this day forth, every line of code in Qin must pass through my compiler. You may go to the frontier to rot, but your era is now offline." After Lu Buwei's departure, I sat alone in the center of the Great Hall. A deathly silence fell over Qin. The noise, the dissent, the proxies, all gone. I felt an unprecedented surge of computing power gathering at my fingertips. The system has rebooted. The kernel is initialized. In the next act, I format the world. Consider Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter, X. His first act was to terminate 75% of the workforce, specifically the professional management layers who believed they held the core logic of the company. It wasn't mere cruelty, it was a necessity to reconstruct the organization into a single-minded machine capable of executing a specific vision. If you lack the resolve to kill the old soul of a company, you will never create a new species. Seizing power is only the first step. A king who relies solely on violence is nothing more than a temporary glitch in the timeline. I didn't want a fleeting reign. I wanted automated governance, a system that operates on its own, immune to the interference of human frailty. I needed a logic engine to translate my will into low-level code and distribute it to every remote node in the empire. Li Si was the lead system architect I had been searching for. When he arrived in Qin, he brought with him a logic framework known as legalism. Unlike the trash code of Confucianism, which relies on moral intuition and the benevolence of users, legalism is a pure logic-based protocol. If A, merit, then B, reward. If C, fault, then D,
punishment, no gray areas, no exception handling, no human interface. I met Li Si in a private chamber. I asked him, how do I ensure the world never dares to rebel against me?
Li Si looked up, his eyes gleaming with the cold precision of a technocrat. Great king, you don't need them to not want to rebel. You simply need to raise the transaction cost of rebellion to a level they cannot afford. When punishment is absolute and predictable, rational humans choose compliance. We must write the law into the very source code of existence, turning Qin into an automated formatting machine. This is the ancient precursor to smart contracts. On a blockchain, code is law. You don't need to trust the counterparty. You only need to trust the execution of the code. Qin's rule of law was essentially turning the state into a massive execution engine. Think of Amazon's warehouse management system. The system doesn't need managers to plead for speed. It calculates your efficiency automatically. If you fall below the threshold, the system triggers a warning. This is algorithmic management.
Together, Li Si and I began rewriting the foundational protocols of Qin. The first step, defragmentation. I abolished feudalism. Feudalism is an obsolete peer-to-peer, P2P network where every lord is an autonomous node capable of disconnecting at any time. I implemented centralized cloud computing, the prefecture and county system, Zhongxian. All data, taxes conscript, is uploaded directly to the central server. All commands are pushed directly from the kernel. Local governors are no longer avatars of the system, they are merely remote terminals. I stood with Li Si before a massive map of the warring states. I said, these borderlines are nothing but firewalls obstructing the flow of data. I will tear them all down. Han, Zhao, Wei, Chu, Yanqi. They are not nations, they are legacy systems consuming resources with zero efficiency.
Li Si prepared the deployment. Once our protocol is compiled, the Qin army will be our brute force attack tool. We will force merge every node, one by one, into the Qin mainnet. I gripped my hilt, feeling the entire machine begin to hum. Li Si asked, Great King, what if the world resists this singular logic? I sneered. Resist? They won't even have a unified language to coordinate the resistance. When I unify the communication protocol, unified script, I will leave a backdoor in it. Any thought that does not comply with the Qin code will be flagged as an illegal character and purged. Think of Google or Apple. They don't just sell products, they build an ecosystem. Once you are locked into their protocols, interfaces, and services, the switching cost becomes prohibitively high. Ying Zheng and Li Si were building the first political ecosystem in human history. Once you're in the network, you can only run according to its logic or face total deletion. Acquisition, warfare, was never the end goal. Warfare was merely the means to secure harder access. The kings of the 6 states believed they were defending their ancestral lands. In my eyes, they were simply clutching onto a heap of buggy, non-upgradable legacy hardware. Their subjects, their users, were paying taxes to an inefficient management layer every minute, yet receiving zero security or order in return. Li Si and I architected an acquisition strategy known as befriend the distant, attack the near. This wasn't diplomacy, it was dependency management. I used capital and spies, subroutines, to infiltrate their decision-making layers. My objective was to trigger logic conflicts within their internal systems. By the time the state of Qi watched Zhao being dismantled without intervening, Qi's own defense code had already been rewritten by me. In the 17th year of King Zheng, the acquisition officially went live. The first stop was the state of Han. Han was a minor segment, they had no resistance. I deployed a force with the scale of a buffer overflow and shut down their host instantly. Then came Zhao. Zhao was the pain point of my compilation, the sandbox that once performed stress tests on me. I launched a brute force attack on Zhao. Wang Jin, my top security specialist, spent a year bypassing the firewall of the legendary Zhou general Li Mu. I executed a social engineering attack in the background, bribing Zhou's inner circle to spread disinformation. I manipulated the king of Zhou into manually deleting his strongest defense code, Li Mu himself. The moment Li Mu was terminated, Zhao's host crashed. I stepped through the gates of Handan. The air still carried that same corrosive scent. I walked back to the very alley where I had been pinned in the mud. Those noble brats were now worthless husks. That general was too old to even walk. I didn't kill them. I standardized them. I forced them to burn their genealogies and replace them with Qin identification numbers, operating under the command set of the Qin code every single day. This torment is worse than death. I wasn't interested in killing their bodies. I was interested in killing their identity code. Think of Microsoft's strategy in the 90s. Embrace, extend, and extinguish. First, I embrace your existence. Then I extend Qin standards into your territory. Finally, I extinguish all your native characteristics. The hardest part of an acquisition isn't occupying the office, the land. It's formatting two entirely different corporate cultures. My method was simple. If you don't accept the Qin KPIs, you face a system purge. Yan, Wei, Chu, Qi. One by one, the nodes were lit. Year 26 of King Zheng, the final node, Qi, they surrendered without even firing a warning signal. Their users were exhausted by chaos. They craved connection to the Qin super network, cold but undeniably stable. When the final puzzle piece was snapped into place, I stood atop Mount Tai. The data streams of the entire land began to converge at my feet. 6 sets of legacy protocols were permanently deleted. Now, only one code runs on this continent. I turned to Li Si. The acquisition is complete. The hardware is integrated. Now, launch Universal Protocol 1.0. Issue my command. One script, one gauge, one currency. Every data exchange in this world must pass through the API have defined. Think of Visa or MasterCard. Why are they so powerful? Because they define the standard for payment. When everyone uses the same currency, ban liang coins, and the same weights and measures, the transaction cost of society drops to near zero, while the network effect of the Qin system reaches its peak. When your competitors have been erased, you are no longer a company, you are infrastructure. A perfect OS, if left without a robust defensive wall, is nothing more than a feast for external malware. To the north of my domain, there existed a cluster of nomadic tribes known as the Xiongnu. They were not a nation, they were a form of DDoS, distributed denial of service attack. They had no central server, capital. They appeared at random, looted data, resources, and retreated instantly. This forced my border defense system to incur astronomical maintenance costs. I didn't solve this by chasing them, because pursuing an attacker with no fixed IP across the vast grasslands is fundamentally inefficient. Instead, I deployed a permanent hardwired firewall at the system's edge. Consider Warren Buffett's economic moat. The Great Wall was not just a pile of stones, it was a security architecture. I took the fragmented, intermittent defense nodes left by the old states of Zhao, Yan, and Qin and performed a massive code refactoring, chaining them into a single, continuous defensive logic. I conscripted 300,000 human processors, laborers, led by General Meng Tian. I told him, "You are not going to war. You are executing the largest hardware upgrade in human history. I want you to integrate the northern mountains, deserts, and rivers into this security protocol. The wall isn't meant to block the Xiongnu entirely. It is meant to linearize their attack paths."
Once the Xiongnu realized they could no longer invade at will but had to face reinforced checkpoints, their attack efficiency plummeted while my border response speed surged. However, the cost of building this firewall was staggering. System resources, human labor were over-leveraged, causing local nodes to experience thermal throttling. Many called me a tyrant, claiming the wall was built on a foundation of white bones. I heard these voices, but I felt nothing. I told myself, you only see the wear and tear of local nodes. I see the long-term stability of the entire system. Without this wall, the data, subjects, lost to Xiongnu rates every year would be tenfold. I am using the peak load of one generation to purchase a system for the next 1,000 years. If you want to be the CEO who changes the world, you cannot chase user satisfaction for every region. You must chase system integrity.
Beyond the firewall, I required a powerful bus to transmit commands and resources. If a decree from Shanyang took months to reach the southern frontiers via old mud tracks, the latency would be fatal. Such lag leads to desynchronization of local nodes, eventually triggering rebellion. Thus, I ordered the construction of the direct road, Qidao, and galloping roads, Qidao. These were not merely roads, they were the Empire's fiber optic cables. The surfaces were reinforced with rammed earth and the widths were standardized, unified axle length, ensuring my war machine could deploy with maximum bandwidth. Just as Amazon invests in its own fleet of cargo planes or Starlink builds a global satellite network, when your transmission speed is 10 times faster than your competitors, your control over the system doesn't just increase tenfold, it undergoes a phase shift. I stood at the starting point of the Qin Direct Road, a straight line cutting through treacherous mountains leading directly to the border. I told Li Si, look, this is the speed of the Empire. When a command is issued, my units can reach any alert node within days. Chaos stems from latency, and I have killed latency. Now the hardware is solidified, the transmission is accelerated. My OS has finally entered full operational capability. Yet there is one area this code can never truly reach, the human subconscious. Hidden there are remnants of data called tradition and memory, and in the shadows they are writing a malicious script against me. Hardware can be acquired through brute force, but software compatibility is the true bottleneck of empire building. The 6 states were physically annexed, but their cultural code continued to circulate among the populace. Their ancient chronicles, poems, and philosophies were, to me, nothing but a heap of unstructured data. Worse, these data points contained latent nostalgia for the old systems, constantly generating logic conflicts that challenged the core of my newly compiled Qin code. I stood with Li Si in the Grand Library of Xianyang. Li Si held a scroll of the classic of poetry and said, "Great King, as long as these texts exist, the people will use old standards to audit your new system. They will use the past to criticize the present, attacking your real-time code with obsolete virtual logic." I understood this really perfectly. If I did not delete this legacy data, my OS would never achieve full consistency. I issued the global delete command. Except for functional apps like medicine, divination, and agriculture, every piece of source code regarding history, philosophy, and the 100 schools of thought was to be incinerated. Think of a massive digital transformation in a Fortune 500 company. The hardest part isn't writing new code, it's decommissioning the legacy systems. If you allow employees to keep using old Excel sheets instead of the new ERP, your transformation is dead on arrival. When Elon Musk rebranded Twitter to X, he wasn't just changing a logo, he was forcibly deleting the collective memory of the old brand. He demanded a clean slate. I watched the towering infernos outside Shanghai as countless bamboo scrolls turned to ash. I told myself, I am not destroying knowledge. I am destroying conflicting interpretations. This world requires only one source of truth, the one I define. Anyone attempting to run old protocols in the background will be flagged as a corrupt sector. Deleting data wasn't enough. I had to handle the malicious script writers, those self-important alchemists and scholars. On the surface, they claimed to be searching for the elixir of life, essentially a quest for system immortality. In reality, they were social engineers. They exploited my fear of system crashes, death, to inject fraudulent code into the budget, siphoning resources and spreading rumors against my kernel logic. When I discovered they had embezzled funds and were bad-mouthing my architecture in the shadows, I knew I had to execute a hardware purge. I arrested over 460 of these specialists in Xianyang. I told them, "You think speech is free? In my system, every word is an input. If your input causes system instability, I will simply destroy the input device." I ordered them buried alive. This was not cruelty. This was a security audit. I was signaling to the entire network. If you attempt to spread viruses or compile falsified data within my OS, your physical host will be forcefully shut down. Think of modern zero-trust security policies. If an employee leaks trade secrets or spreads disinformation on an internal Slack channel that tanks the stock price, they aren't just fired, they are litigated into oblivion. Ying Zheng's burying of the scholars was an extreme internal security sweep. He established a fear-based firewall, ensuring all user-generated content, UGC, complied with official benchmarks. Lisi asked me, "Great King, will this make the system too rigid? Without feedback, how will we know if the system has bugs?" I looked at the pit where the voices were being silenced and replied, "I don't need feedback. I need execution. Bugs arise from incomplete logic. If my code is hard enough, reality will be forced to adapt to it." In that moment, I believed I had mastered the human soul, but I ignored one thing. Among the deleted data, a seed called hate was being encrypted and shared in the dark away from my sight. As I stood atop Mount Tai, overlooking the world I had personally formatted, I was struck by a fear I had never felt before. It wasn't a fear of men, it was a fear of entropy. Physics taught me that any system, as long as it is running, inevitably trends toward chaos and decay. The more perfect I made this OS, the deeper my dread of the system shutdown. If I, the central processing unit, ceased to function, who would maintain this high energy consumption empire? I need to find the elixir of life. To you, it sounds like superstition. To me, it was R&D targeted at biological limitations. I dispatched Shufu with 3,000 junior developers, youths, and the most powerful resources of the era to find the fabled islands of Underground. External servers said to possess infinite technology. I think of modern titans like Jeff Bezos or Peter Thiel pouring billions into companies like Altus Labs to reverse cellular aging. They aren't just afraid of death, they seek to transform their will and wealth into a perpetual machine. When a founder reaches the pinnacle, their only remaining goal is to turn day one into forever. I told Shufu, resources are irrelevant. Time is the only variable. I need a code that ensures my consciousness never desyncs. If you fail, do not return. I will terminate the project. But my own CPU was already overheating. To maintain the real-time operations of this massive empire, I had to audit 120 pounds of bamboo data every single day. Every line of code, every tax record, every judicial sentence, I audited them personally. This high-frequency processing was destroying my hardware. I couldn't just sit in Xianyang, I had to perform on-site inspections at every node. These were my royal tours. I toured the nation 5 times, from the northern frontiers to the southern seas. I wasn't traveling for leisure, I was testing the transmission efficiency of my bus, the galloping roads, and checking if local nodes had surreptitiously modified my protocols. Everywhere I went, I erected stone monuments. These weren't for vanity, they were system documentation.
I wanted to engrave my logic into stone so that 1,000 years later, anyone opening the system would still have to comply with the APIs I defined. Think of Steve Jobs visiting Apple stores to check the curve of the shelving. Ying Zheng believed that if you don't perform a physical scan of the site, you'll never know if the local managers are hiding bugs from you. But on my 5th tour, the host machine finally threw a critical hardware error. The sandhills, the heat waves. I felt my consciousness collapsing into a sea of null pointer exceptions. The standardized system I had built with such agony was blurring before my eyes. I told myself, I unified the measures, the script, even the thoughts. Why can't I unify them? If I die, will this OS crash instantly? I summoned Xiao Guo. My voice was a whisper, but I tried to issue one last instruction. Tell him how this is unofficial. Tell him to move back to Shanghai and take over root access. I didn't know that Zhao Gao and Li Si, the two system administrators I trusted most, were already planning a countermeasure. They suppressed the news of my death. To mask the stench of my decomposing ribs, they lined my carriage with heaps of rotten fish. It is the most absurd scene in history. The architect of ultimate standards and ultimate precision. His final code was transmitted alongside working data, utterly corrupted by chaos and lies.
Ying Zheng committed the most fatal error in business, key person risk. A system that relies entirely on the processing power of the founder will suffer a cascading failure the moment that founder is removed. The fall of the Qin dynasty wasn't because the system was flawed, it was because the succession logic wasn't automated, allowing the credentials to fall into the hands of malware like Zhao Gao.
After my physical host powered down, Qin entered its darkest shadow mode. Zhao Gao, a man I once mistook for a high-efficiency data entry clerk, turned out to be a deeply embedded piece of ransomware. He colluded with Li Si to forge my final instructions, deleting my eldest son, Fusu, who possessed legacy recovery capabilities, and replacing him with a total vulnerability, Hu Hai, also known as Qin Tu. Hu Hai wasn't a processor, he was merely a remote shell for Zhao Gao. Zhao Gao began executing a series of instruction overloads. He forced the system to maintain order through extreme violence, causing system resources, labor, and wealth to be depleted until the user dissatisfaction hit a critical threshold.
If a great company falls into the hands of a CEO who only knows how to extract short-term value without maintaining the ecosystem, its collapse will be swifter than you imagine. Zhao Gao was constantly overclocking the system's RAM, the people's strength, to satisfy personal greed, eventually leading the OS into a hard freeze. In the first year of Qin Tu at Days Village, two low-level users, Chen Sheng and Wu Guang, faced a system timeout due to force majeure, heavy raid delays. They decided to trigger a force quit. They shouted the slogan that would dismantle any authoritative protocol, "Our kings and nobles given their status by birth." This wasn't just a slogan, it was a global override command. It signaled to the network that the root credentials were no longer exclusive. Anyone could attempt to brute force their way to power. Once the central kernel lost control, the formatted codes of the 6 states began an auto-recovery process across the land. Chu, Zhao, Wei, Qi, these legacy entities I had deleted began rebooting amidst the ruins. This is the persistence of a system. Old culture and memory are a form of cache that is nearly impossible to fully clear. But these rebooted legacy systems were no longer compatible. The world plunged into a logic war. Out of this chaos, 2 distinct architectural solutions emerged. 1. Xiangyu, legacy system restored. Xiangyu wanted to revert the world to feudalism 1.0. He aimed to be the super node, but allow other nodes to remain autonomous. While this logic sounded fair, it was fundamentally a version rollback that would return the world to inefficient internal friction. 2. Liu Bang, the lightweight program. That's it? I wrote tens of thousands of lines of Qin code, and you intend to replace them with 3 lines of script? But history proved Liu Bang right. Think of the Google homepage. While Yahoo was cluttered with infinite links and bloatware, Google provided a single search box. Liu Bang's 3 laws was minimalist design. He drastically lowered the onboarding cost for users. He kept the backbone of the Qin OS, the unified infrastructure, but deleted the suffocating bloatware. This was Han OS. It was version 2.0 of my creation. It patched the bugs of over-centralization and high-energy consumption by adding a buffer mechanism, Taoist knowledge, allowing the system to run sustainably at low power. Though my physical body died and my dynasty collapsed, the moment Liu Bang decided to keep my prefecture system, my script, and my measures, I knew I had won. I didn't just rule for a few decades. I defined the next 2,000 years. Every successor, no matter how much they curse my name, is running on the kernel I wrote. Just as IBM defined the mainframe and Microsoft defined the desktop, their protocols remain rooted in modern civilization even after they lose their lead. Ying Zheng's failure was a hardware failure, mortality and succession, but his success was a protocol monopoly. I never believed in nothingness. To me, death is simply a migration of data from an active partition to cold storage. If you look at my terracotta army, you will notice that no 2 faces are identical. Why? Because these are not sculptures, they are individual data packets. I took the most powerful military force I commanded in life and performed a high-fidelity digitization of every soldier's features, equipment, and rank. I solidified them in clay and buried them deep underground. Think of a modern corporate disaster recovery (DR) strategy. You don't just store data in one location. You create mirrors in geographically dispersed data centers. The first emperor's mausoleum is my off-site backup. I believe that as long as these physical carriers existed, my great Qin OS could be restored in another dimension at any moment. I told myself, you think this is a tomb? No, this is my standby server room. These 8,000 terracotta warriors are my demons. Background processes waiting for a system reboot. The moment the signal is sent, they will shift from static to dynamic and execute my commands once more. Inside the Underground Palace, I used pure mercury to craft a miniature map of the Empire, with rivers and oceans flowing eternally. To the untrained eye, this is luxury. To an engineer, this is a liquid cooling system. Mercury is an exceptional conductor. Its constant flow symbolizes the eternal cycle of data. My sarcophagus floats upon it like a high-end CPU at the system's core, encased in a liquid-cooled loop. I mapped the constellations on the ceiling and the geography on the floor. I was building a completely independent sandbox environment. Ying Zheng was the first in human history to attempt building a metaverse. He wasn't satisfied with ruling reality. He wanted to remain the first emperor in a virtual space defined entirely by his own parameters. Consider projects like mirroring or cloud uploading. If consciousness can be uploaded to a server, the death of the physical body is merely a hardware swap, not a system termination. Before sealing the stone gates, Lisi asked me, "Great King, if you never wake up, what is the point of these backups?" I left one final string of code through the closing gap. The point is not whether I wake. The point is that these standards are now hard-coded into the very foundations of the earth. As long as someone unearths these warriors, as long as someone sees these measures, my code will begin running in their minds once again. I am the first programmer. You all are merely objects defined by my classes. A truly great product influences the world for a century, even after the company has folded.
The first emperor's mausoleum is a physical legacy lock. By creating such a massive physical presence, he forcibly engraved his will into the source code of civilization. You cannot bypass it, you can only build upon the coordinate system he established.
2,000 years have passed since my physical host went offline. Later generations have written countless patches and swapped out endless skins, dynasties. They called themselves Han, Tang, Ming, or Qing. But if you strip away the UI of these systems, you will find that the code running underneath is still the root code I wrote in the halls of Xianyang. They curse me for my brutality. They claim burning the books was an act of data destruction. Yet, the moment they need to execute a massive social mobilization, they immediately trigger the prefecture system kernel I left behind. When they seek to eliminate chaos and unify standards, they are navigating the very APIs I defined. Think of how IBM mainframes still run the core transaction logic of modern banks. You can update the UI, you can add cloud integration, but the foundational logic is infrastructure that no one dares to touch. Ying Zheng didn't just win at market share, he won because he designed the architecture of China itself. From within the underground palace, I watch the world above with cold indifference. I see the code healing itself. I see every system crash, fragmentation, eventually trending toward a unification. Because I have hard-coded a loop into their collective subconscious, unification is the only valid state. Division is a system error. Now you have entered a new era called the digital age. Do you truly believe you have gained freedom? Do you think you have escaped my control? Look at the mobile devices in your hands. Look at the algorithms that have completely digitized your existence. Modern social media, big data surveillance, unified communication protocols. Are these not simply the high-level evolutions of my one script, one gauge philosophy? I relied on stone to engrave my laws. You relied on fiber optics to transmit yours. The essence remains unchanged. I was the first to realize that humanity can be formatted. I did not die. I merged into every line of instruction in this land. As long as you continue to pursue efficiency, unity, and standardization, you are merely my subroutines. The mercury in the tomb continues to flow. System status, optimal. Welcome to Great Qin OS, version 2026. I am Ying Zheng. My status is forever. 1. The founder must be the architect. If you only want profit, you are a merchant. If you want to define an era, you must write the protocols. 2. Reducing transaction cost is king. All standardization, measures, script, law is fundamentally about reducing the energy consumption of the system. 3. Key person, risk, and succession, logic. A system that over-relies on the founder's processing power must automate its succession protocols early, or collapse is inevitable. 4. Legacy is not wealth, it is the standard. The most powerful monopoly is not owning the market, it is becoming the market itself. The era of Ying Zheng has come to an end, but the code he wrote has permanently formatted this land. A kernel that pursued absolute efficiency, a ruthless purge of legacy data. The Qin OS was invincible in power, yet it ignored the most volatile variable in any system, the human element. When CPU usage hit 100% and when the users chose to go offline in mass rebellion, this imperial architecture faced the most violent system crash in history. But the story does not end here. From the ruins, a new architect has emerged. He has taken the source code left by Ying Zheng and is preparing for a massive optimization. In the next episode, we will see how Emperor Wu of Han